everybody, and welcome to what is going to be a very eventful evening, a first-time event for all of us. I'm Marty Reed, and on behalf of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America, I am extremely proud to be your host for our first Heroes of Horsepower live stream event. Now, tonight, we're going to meet and celebrate 2020 Motorsports Hall of Fame of America drag racing inductee, Ohio George Montgomery. And tonight's presented by George's longtime friends and sponsor, Malco Products, and we want to thank them very much for making this possible. You know, George was known as the king of the gassers. He won 7 NHRA national titles, being so dominant in the gas classes that he was named one of NHRA's top 50 drag racers of all time. Our base of operations tonight will be George's Speed Shop in Dayton, Ohio. And it is the oldest speed shop in continuous operation in the United States. It's where all the speed and innovations came from and where George still comes to work, believe it or not, every day. George and his son, Greg Montgomery, are going to be able to take us around the shop, and periodically we'll be joined by some of the greatest names in motorsports, including the one and only Big Daddy Don Garlits. But first, if you enjoyed tonight's free webcast and you want to see more of them, please consider making a donation in any amount to the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. It's at mshf.com. It's real simple, mshf.com. And I know with everything that's going on with COVID, money can be a little tight. But if you can support the program, there's the website, mshf.com. The Motorsports Hall of Fame of America is the Hall of Fame that covers the entire American motorsports scene. You may remember George's cars. If you were back in those days, they were sponsored by Malco Automotive Products. It included the famous Malco gasser. Malco Chief Change Agent Stuart Glauberman wanted to say a few words about his old friend, Ohio George Montgomery.
Hello, my name is Stuart Glauberman, and Malco is honored to be the presenting sponsor for Ohio George's induction into the Motorsports Hall of Fame. Our relationship with Ohio George started when my father, Murray Glauberman, was introduced to him by our Malco distributor in Dayton, Ohio. I vividly remember attending races throughout Northeast Ohio and having the opportunity to ride in the chase vehicle to the end of the track. What a thrill for a 10-year-old. Today, we are 2 multi-generational companies that have shared common experiences and a personal relationship that has spanned 5 decades. I remember watching Ohio George race his Ford Willys, and we were privileged to be able to sponsor 6 innovative vehicles throughout your racing career. My dad's favorite car was always the Ford Willys. In fact, when my mom first learned to drive, that was the first car that he bought her. I actually remember her driving home from Cleveland after he bought her the car. I can tell you that she didn't go through the gears quite as smooth as you do. The Malco gasser was always my favorite, and we were privileged to have your Boss Turbo in our booth at SEMA, where your car won the Master of Motors award. Our only regret over the last 50 years is that we were not able to be in Daytona to share in his induction into the Motorsports Hall of Fame. George, on behalf of the employees of Malco Products and the Glauberman family, we would like to congratulate you on this well-deserved honor to be introduced in the Motorsports Hall of Fame. We wish you the best.
We want to thank you for those great words. And at this point, what we're going to do now is shift our cameras over to Dayton, Ohio, and show you around the speed shop. And George is standing by with son Greg. And gentlemen, as we get into this, I want to ask you, George, as we start this, and there's a story that I want you to help clear up, because how you got the nickname of Ohio George Montgomery. Because back in that day, there was an actor named George Montgomery, and someone a long time ago told me that that's why somebody tagged you with Ohio. What's the real story behind all that?
We had quite a feud between the West Coast and the East Coast. West Coast guys thought they was the best, but I had different ideas on that. So there were a lot of ads running in papers and stuff. And some of the ads at the time could be pretty nasty. So rather than using my full name, they just called me Ohio George. but that's kind of where that started from. It was some of the ads. It was called the gas wars of those days. I don't know if my son's got any better idea on what it was than that.
Most of the gassers of that era were California based. And you came out of Ohio, 5 months of good weather. They had weather most all year long. And they nicknamed you Ohio, George, because you were one of the few from the Midwest that actually could beat those guys.
Yes, and I was at the time, I was still working, and I couldn't go traveling like what most of them did, because I had to be back to go to work on Monday. So it was very limited to what traveling I could do, and I couldn't make the West Coast trips and stuff like what they did. So it was more limited on what I did. But that's about the best I can say on how that the word Ohio George got started. And there was a couple times they called me the Ohio Easter Bunny. They claimed I only come out and raced once a year, and I'd whip them to the Nationals and send them back home again.
That's great. Hey, take us a little bit around the shop. I see an awful lot of hardware in the background there.
Yes, there is. In fact, I don't hold it all here. This is all I really got room for. I still got some at home, and my son's got some at his home, and I just didn't have any room for more than that. And
is there one that means more to you than any other?
It's hard to say. The one that's kind of here right behind me was probably the biggest one. That was when I won the Nationals in 1963. But they all meant a lot to me. Some of the small ones and the large ones. Some were harder than others. I can't say any of them were really easy, but I worked hard to be where I did. I started with nothing. My parents, we had nothing in the early days. And this was all hard work. And it showed the accomplishments of what I did. And I sure upset the West Coast guys, I'll tell you that.
Yes, you did. Hey, Greg, what about your dad? What is the one special feeling, emotion? What makes you most proud of all what he has accomplished?
Dad was very hard on working for Dad. I remember at a very young age, I started working here when I was 4.5. I couldn't reach the drill press handle, so I had to stand on a box. But the payoffs was, I was very little, and he brought back, for the 60 Nationals in Detroit, he brought back a new car. And that was really special, and a good remembrance of that. And the Ranchero that he won, he still has today. And along with that story, it was the first car I learned how to drive in when I was teenage years. So there's a lot of stories, and they're all
George,
good.
Let me ask you this, because a lot of people would say, hey, why are you still working, coming into the shop every day when you could just kick back and sort of take it easy?
It's hard for me to take it easy. In my day, I did everything, and I get depressed today because I can't do everything. I don't walk as well as I used to, and I get depressed and I can't do more than I do. I don't want to sit around and do nothing. I just can't do it.
Marty, I tell Dad some days don't come in, you're fine, but no, he still wants to come in every day, and we're here together every morning at 8:30. So,
well, I'll tell you what, more power to both of you.
Right.
COVID-19 forced the cancellation of the official induction ceremonies back in March. And there's a moment now that gives all of us that are involved in the program great pride. And that's introducing your video that everybody would have seen on that night. And now we're going to show it to you this night as you are inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America.
And here comes one of the high points of the whole meet. The Stonewoods Cook entry in the far lane and George Montgomery in the near lane. It's California versus Ohio in a battle of the gassers.
George Montgomery of Dayton, Ohio, former national record holder. Everybody's been waiting for this one. This is the World Series of drag racing. Everybody anticipating this all year long, looking for the finals, the national championship. And here we go with the semifinals. It's Montgomery taking his flight lead. A good start by Montgomery. And he's going to take him. Montgomery slices across, and he defeats the former record holder, Doug Cook.
What does it cost to get one of these things ready to go for a championship race like this?
Well, this car has in excess of $10,000 invested in it.
George Montgomery versus Gene Allison. Both cars are A gassers with Montgomery supercharged. George Montgomery, who retired at 27 after winning the Little Eliminator title 2 years in a row, comes back at 30 to take the Middle Eliminator trophy.
In 8:59, 164 miles per hour win, Ohio George, the national champion.
Some great memories. And George, I want to ask you what this moment means to you, knowing that you are a part of racing history and will be immortal in the halls of the Hall of Fame.
It means a lot. It means really a lot to me. I kind of thought for a while they'd forgotten about me. The early gassers, the gasser wars was mainly our hot rod street cars that we drove and raced in the early days. And then as that progressed to a point, the funny cars were starting to be made, and they were not in the same kind of a class. They were funny cars. And the funny cars took over to be the most popular one because they was faster and everything else. And the gassers just kind of died away. And it looked like I was kind of forgotten about. But, and I was kind of depressed about this at the time. And it was just, I think 2 years ago, NHRA had a celebration of the legends of drag racing. And at every one of the major meets, they'd have a couple of the legends would show up there, but no one had ever called me. So I talked to one of the head honchos at NHRA and said, "What's the deal? You've never contacted me about this." And he said, "You know what?" He said, "I'll have the fellow that's handling the legends call you." He called me, and I said, "You do know who I am, don't you?" And he said, "I've never heard of you." So that didn't help matters either. They had some young guy there that really didn't know about the legends of the early racers, which I was part of. But yes, that did bother me tremendously.
I can tell you right now, you're never going to be forgotten again because that plaque is going to be there forever. You know, at this time, I want to bring in another legend of the sport. The name Don Garlits, of course, synonymous with drag racing. He was so dominant during his career that remember when the top 50 NHRA racers were announced, guess who was number one? In fact, he's the only guy I know that has a nickname for his nickname. He went from being Big Daddy Don Garlits to everybody just calling him Big. And Big, I want to bring you in now because I want you to share the story with how you and Ohio George became friends and share some stories with us.
You know, I really, I'm enjoying this because George is really a great guy and I've known him a really long time. I first met George in the late 50s at one of the major Midwest drag races, the 1957 ATAA, that's the Automobile Timing Association of America, the World Series held at Cordova, Illinois. George was driving his 1934 blue Ford Coupe, and it ended up in the winner's circle. In the early 2000s, I asked George, did he know whatever happened to that blue coupe? George said he sold the coupe in 1965 to an Ed Becker who lived somewhere in western Indiana. The hunt began. I traced Mr. Becker to Lafayette, Indiana. It took several years for me to acquire the coupe. Fortunately, it had been in dry storage all those years and was unmolested. It needed some minor mechanical work and some blue paint on the hood and fenders. There's a brass plaque on the dash stating that the coupe had set a record at Bonneville in 1950 at 125 miles an hour with a flathead Ford engine. I asked George about this, and he said he had driven the coupe to Bonneville, set the record, and drove it back to Dayton. I mean, that's in those days, race cars weren't worked on between rounds. Anyway, George later installed a 1949 overhead valve Cadillac V8 into the coupe and added a McCullough supercharger. There were no kits for such a thing back then, and everything was custom made by George himself. And this is how it was raced at the World Series, and that's how I found the car. What was so amazing was the beautiful workmanship throughout the coupe. Everything was up to aircraft specs, and George was only a teenager at the time. I had no trouble getting it running after nearly 40 years, and in 2005, George was selected by the NHRA to be the Grand Marshal for the Gator Nationals. I took the car to Gainesville to drive George down the strip for the pre-race parade. George had not seen the coupe for over 40 years, and riding down the Gainesville drag strip in the old Ford coupe brought tears to his eyes, and mine too. We at Drag Racing Museum are very proud to have such an original artifact from one of the very early pioneers of our sport, and what a great craftsman. And just to add a little tidbit, just the other day we acquired his 1949 Anglia Prefect four-door sedan that had been gone out of George's possession for many years. And an old man came into the museum and said, I got one of George's cars. Of course, I just laughed. I didn't think he had it. And he showed me the car, and it really looked nice, but there was no George Montgomery anywhere on it, but it did have the hearse passer on it and all the original stuff, but no George Montgomery. So I got on the phone and called George. He said, yep, that's my car. So he told me to send me some pictures so we'll know where to put George Montgomery on this wonderful artifact we're so proud to have. So that means we got his first car, and we got one of his cars during his career. And I'd just like to welcome George Montgomery into the Motorsports Hall of Fame, a very well-deserving recipient. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Don. It means a lot to me. I remember a lot of good times with you. We was in a winner's circle on more than one occasion, Don.
Well, George, I know it looks like you're getting a little choked up, so I'm going to step in here. I'm going to remind everybody that Big was the very first NHRA drag racer inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. And I want to let you know that the induction ceremony, the formal induction ceremony, is scheduled right now for March 15th and 16th of 2021, when George and the other 8 heroes of horsepower will be formally inducted into the Hall of Fame. Tickets are available now at mshf.com. And again, the date is March 15th and 16th, and hopefully we've got this COVID-19 under control so that we'll all be able to gather in Daytona. Thank you, Big. Right now, I want to turn from the yesteryears to today. One of the great things about motorsports is how one generation inspires the next. And Certainly that's the case with our next speaker, and that's Fast Jack Beckman, the 2012 NHRA Funny Car World Champion. And Jack, tell us what George meant to you when you were growing up and getting into racing, and what does that friendship mean today?
So I get a paycheck to drive a nitro car, and I mean, if you look behind me, never my wildest dreams that I think I'd have a chance to do what I've done here. I still have a lot of pinch me moments like this group conversation with having Garlits on it and Roger Bailey and you, Marty. You go way back with drag racing, but George is just a very special guy. I remember if you go to Indy, over the last 25 years, the pro cars will pit on the right side, and on the left side of the track where the sportsman cars are pitted is the nostalgia area. They'll have a corral there, they'll have an autograph place, they'll have the old cars set up. So I'm over there probably about 10 years ago. And I'm talking to various people that I already know that were legends and drivers in the day. And this gentleman comes up to me and he says, "Hey, you don't know me, but I've been watching you, and I just want to say I think you're doing a really good job." And I said, "George, I know exactly who you are." And like I literally just got goosebumps right now repeating that story, that George Montgomery came up to me because I'm a huge fan of the sport. And I fancy myself as a decent historian of the sport. And George and I talk frequently. I'll call Dawn Big. I'll call Big up quite often and confirm a story. But, you know, long before they were called the U.S. Nationals, before they even moved to Indy, George wasn't the first NHRA Nationals winner, but he was the first guy to do it twice. He was the first guy to do it 3 times. I mean, he just seemed like he owned that race. And I have, over the last 8 months, gotten myself down a rabbit hole that I sometimes wish I hadn't. And it's been doing a history project because I've been given a whole lot of the older magazines, Drag News, National Dragsters, Hot Rods, whatnot. And I was in the garage last night. I was going through the 68, 69, and 70 Carcraft magazines. And the wild thing is if you start picking up the auto magazines from the late 50s for a 15-year period, you can't go 2 issues without seeing George's name in there. And, you know, George, you had mentioned, and I get it when you say you felt like you'd been forgotten. And I have a little bit of a theory on this. I don't think you were ever forgotten. I think you were overlooked. And there's a big difference. And for whatever reason, I think that the nitro cars seem to get the lion's share of the credit. And it just took somebody stepping back a little bit and saying, "Hey, wait a minute. We overlooked a big one here." You know, I think if you look at the pyramid when it comes to a drag race career, if you can get into the International Drag Racing Hall of Fame after your career is over, that is something you can hang your hat on, and you have made it. That's as good as it gets. And George, you've been in there for years and years and years. But there's actually one more that's arguably a level above that, and that's the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America, because it covers all the different motorsports. And as much as, George, you might have felt like you were overlooked not getting chosen earlier, I think drag racers in general sometimes feel overlooked compared to the other motorsports out there. So the fact that you are now in both of those museums, and there's other ones also, obviously, that you're in, but I mean, that's as good as it gets. And I cannot think of a more deserving person. And Greg, I want to thank you. I think it was last month, I was talking to your dad to clarify some historical things. And Greg got on the phone and he said, "You know what, I just want to tell you something, Jack. My dad really enjoys his conversations with you." And I don't know quite how to give you guys a good analog for this. I guess to me, imagine that you're a high school baseball player and you're pretty good at what you do, but the phone rings and 1 week it's Stan Musial and 1 week it's Joe DiMaggio and the next week it's Mickey Mantle. So the fact that I can talk to George Montgomery and Don Garlits and the Perdomes and the Roland Leongs, it's a lot of pinch me moments. And it's ironic, I don't want to take up everybody's time here, but this coming weekend might be my last race in a nitro car. Sponsorship usually dictates careers, and it might be tough sailing from here on out. But it's been more than I ever thought it would be. And to get to spend this time with you, legends and heroes, and Linda, you're also one of them. I had pictures that I cut out of magazines when I was a little kid of you writing on the back of that Hearst goals, and you're as big a legend of this sport also. So I appreciate you guys inviting me on this. It's quite humbling. And George, congratulations. And all I can say is maybe it's a few years later than it should have been, but it's well-deserved and you're in.
Okay. Thank you. Jack, that meant so much to me. It really did. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in again, George, give you a chance to get your thoughts back together. And I'm glad that it's emotional, because that shows everybody just how important this is. And Jack, thanks for spoiling my next surprise intro. Whether you call her Miss Hurst Golden Shifter or the First Lady of Motorsports, this 2019 inductee into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America has been a big fan of drag racing her entire life. The annual U.S. Nationals is a lock on her calendar. You know that she was at every NHRA event for a span of 30 years, and I'm talking about none other than Linda Vaughn. Linda, good evening, and how are you doing?
Thank you. Congratulations, George. And Beckman, that was so sweet of you. I'm very honored to be here with y'all tonight for a lot of reasons, but I met George my very first year as Miss Hurst Golden Shifter. 1966, and he won that Nationals. He won it for the next 4 years. But I remember reading about him in 64 and 5, but I was still in school. So when I graduated and won Miss Hurst, I got to meet him, and I got to go to the speed shop. George Hurst was, and Jack Duffy knew exactly what George Montgomery is all about. What a great, great driver. And then Joe Rudka, who also sponsored him in the gasket car. So I kind of grew up with George. And a lot of people don't know that. He built all those engines for those Indy Light cars. He also had Salt Walther at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I hung out with all of them. Salt made the race thanks to George building and working hard on those engines. And they said drag racers couldn't do it, George, but you did.
Thank you, Linda. There's some nice words.
And I love your book, and thank you so much for being my friend for all these years. And wish you continued success. And age has nothing to do with one's mind. And you guys have got great minds and great hearts. And congratulations and welcome to the Motorsports Hall of Fame. It's absolutely the highlight of my life last year to be on stage with my guys. And I was so proud that when they told me, and we want to thank the late Ron Watson for all his hard work and what he's done, and his entire staff. So all you folks out there, come to the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in Daytona. You won't be disappointed. It's absolutely beautiful, and I'm proud to be a part of it with you, George.
Thank you, Linda.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I feel the same for you. We've had a lot of years together, and I think the world of you. Thank you,
Thank
Linda.
you. Thank you, darling.
Well, we do have one more guest for tonight, and you heard Linda sort of give you a sneak preview when she mentioned the Indy Lights series. Well, this next guest worked very closely with George in that series. For 15 years, George's speed shop was the sole supplier of the Buick V6 spec engines for the Indy Lights series. A lot of people didn't know about that. Now, it meant most of the next generation of Indy 500 drivers had a direct connection to Ohio George. And I want to bring in now Roger Bailey, the man who ran the Indy Lights series for many years. And Roger, good evening. Great to see you. Give us your thoughts on tonight.
Well, good evening, Marty. I feel like the odd one out here because I never had the pleasure of going down the strip at 100 and 200 miles an hour. So I heard a lot about it from George. Like all kinds of motorsports, I think familiarity and having friends in the business, one thing leads to another. And when Patrick and Robin Hurd decided to start the Indy Lights in the end of 1985, we only had a few months to get the engine program together. We went to Chevrolet. It didn't suit what they wanted to do. They sent us to Buick, and a guy named Don Hackworth said, yeah, I'll help you. And I think we got 36 kits of Buick V6 engines to assemble in about a 3-month period. So I think 12 went to Ruggles, 12 went to Wegars, and 12 went to Dennis Fisher. But then we decided that for a spec series, all the engines had to come from one facility. So as the engines were built and sent out to the various teams and cars, the understanding was that for all the rebuilds, it would go back to George Montgomery, because I didn't know who George Montgomery was, but my good friend Patrick had an engine built there with him named Sonny Meyer, and Sonny knew George from God way back when, and Sonny said, you know, it's central, it's in Dayton, Ohio, and you won't find anybody more attentive to detail with excellent quality than George Montgomery. So we came down to Dayton, Ohio, and got to meet George and Greg, and I think the rest is history. I can't remember how many hundreds of engines George built for us over a 15-year span, but I think the thing that was most important, they were all identical. I mean, a couple of horsepower here or there, a couple of horsepower there is nothing, but everyone that came off the dyno, George personally guaranteed that they would be the same as all the others. We never allocated engines to anybody in the series. They took an engine from a pile, so it didn't matter whether you had number 3 or 33, they were all identical. George and Greg attended every race with us and became very, very much part of the program. And I have to thank George and Greg for everything they did for us that made it successful. The number of failures that we had, you can count on one hand, and most of those were created by crew chiefs that probably weren't familiar with what they ought to have been doing, and we had a couple of problems, but the ones that came from George, you could count on one hand. It was a good, great story. We're looking at today's drivers. You look back at Scott Dixon, who just won the IRL championship. His first race with a George Montgomery engine, I think it was 1997 when he was with Stefan Johansson. And he's gone on for God knows how many years that is. And he's still the Indy Lights champion. Castro Neves, Canan, all those old boys all started in Indy Lights with George Montgomery engines. It's funny to look back and see how some of them have developed. I'm so proud to be part of this program and to know that George has finally been inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame. And I don't know what else to say, Marty.
Well, George, I'm going to let you, as we finished with all our surprise guests, and let you have the final word before we close things out tonight. George, the stage is yours.
Yeah. It's hard for me to say much. This means a whole lot to me because all these were a great part of my career. Wonderful people. It'd be hard to ever relive it, but from day one, all these people have been a great part of my stuff. And I started with nothing. But you know, the big thing is that me and Big Don Yartless, we whipped them California guys, and they hated that. That's about the size of it, though. I had quite a career with my drag racing and with the wonderful people I met in the Indy Lights things, including you, Roger. You're greatest.
Well,
Thank
George,
you.
we want to all say congratulations once again. I want to remind everybody one more time that March 15th and 16th of 2021, George and the other 8 inductees from the 2020 class will be formally inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America down in Daytona. All you have to do is log on to the Motorsports Hall of Fame website and MHFS, and you will be able to get your tickets if you would like to join us there, and hopefully COVID-19 will be long gone. I want to thank everybody that was involved tonight. Malco Products for helping George and Greg, of course, with their help out in Dayton. Our special guest, Linda Vaughn, Big Cat Don Garlitz, and Fast Jack Beckman. And all of you that took the time to tune in tonight, get the feedback in. We want to hear from you at the Hall of Fame because we want to try and do more of these down the road. This is, or at least the time being, the way that we're going to be able to communicate safely with everybody. I also want to recommend the webcast to your friends. You can see it on YouTube. You can tell them that they missed it tonight. They can catch it there. For everyone involved in this, one other thank you to our friends at VidMonster who helped put this all together technically. And it went off extremely well, I have to say. I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you to everyone. And we bid you a fun good evening until we meet again.
Congratulations, George.
Go, George.
Thank you.
George, you deserved it.
Thank you, all of you. I've enjoyed being on here tonight. But again, not much more to say. It really means a lot to me. It really does. Thank you.
Yay.